The war that began with Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022 continues shaping nearly every decision made by Ukraine's leadership. Even as the battlefield remains active across Ukrainian territory, international developments are drawing attention to how the country positions itself within a wider global environment. Among those developments is the growing crisis surrounding Iran. While Ukraine continues defending itself against Russia's invasion, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has also addressed international tensions involving Iran. His statements reflect how events beyond Ukraine's borders can intersect with the realities of a war already unfolding at home. For Ukraine, the conflict with Russia remains the central challenge. Russian forces crossed into Ukrainian territory with the objective of asserting control over regions that belong to Ukraine under internationally recognized borders. In response, Ukrainian forces mobilized across the country, organizing defenses and coordinating with local authorities to resist the advance. Cities became centers of resistance. Roads and infrastructure were secured by Ukrainian units. Communities across the country adapted to the conditions created by war. Even as this struggle continues, Ukraine's leadership maintains communication with international partners and observes developments in other regions that may influence global security. The crisis involving Iran has become one such development. Tensions surrounding Iran have drawn attention from governments around the world, and Ukrainian leadership has acknowledged the situation while remaining focused on defending the country against Russia's invasion. President Zelensky has spoken publicly about international security concerns linked to Iran. These statements occur at a time when Ukraine itself remains engaged in a war that has reshaped the nation's daily life. The connection between these two issues reflects the broader environment in which Ukraine now operates. For Ukraine, international events are never isolated. They influence diplomatic conversations. They affect alliances. They shape the global discussion surrounding security. While Ukrainian forces remain on the front lines defending territory from Russian aggression, the country's leadership continues participating in conversations about global stability. Observers note that Ukraine's position in the international community has grown more prominent since the beginning of the war. The invasion placed Ukraine at the center of discussions about sovereignty, territorial integrity, and international law. As a result, statements made by Ukrainian leaders often carry significance beyond the immediate conflict with Russia. When President Zelensky addresses international developments such as tensions involving Iran, he does so while leading a country that remains under military pressure. Russian forces continue operating in several regions of Ukraine. Artillery fire, reconnaissance missions, and troop movements define daily conditions along the front lines. Ukrainian soldiers remain deployed in defensive positions where their mission is clear: protect the country, defend communities, resist the invasion. Despite these challenges, Ukraine's leadership continues engaging with the wider international community. The situation involving Iran represents a reminder that global security concerns rarely occur in isolation. Events in one region can influence discussions and policies in another. For Ukraine, maintaining communication with international partners remains essential. Diplomatic relationships contribute to the support Ukraine receives as it defends its sovereignty. Conversations about broader security issues often take place within the same channels that coordinate assistance to Ukraine. In this environment, Zelensky's attention to international developments reflects the responsibilities of leadership during wartime. The president must address the immediate realities of defending Ukraine while also responding to developments that affect the international system in which Ukraine operates. For Ukrainian citizens living through the war, the focus remains on survival and resilience. Communities across the country continue adapting to the conditions created by Russia's invasion. Air raid sirens, damaged infrastructure, and displacement have become familiar elements of daily life for many people. Yet within those circumstances, Ukrainians continue supporting the country's defense. Volunteers assist soldiers by delivering equipment and supplies. Medical teams provide treatment for those injured during combat. Emergency responders work to protect civilians during attacks. While global tensions involving Iran capture international attention, Ukraine's internal reality remains defined by the ongoing war with Russia. The battlefield continues shaping the nation's future. For Ukrainian soldiers stationed along defensive lines, the mission remains straightforward: defend the homeland, protect fellow citizens, ensure the country remains independent. One Ukrainian serviceman described that commitment during a brief conversation with reporters. "We are here because our country needs us," he said quietly. Those words reflect the determination shared by many Ukrainians as they continue confronting Russia's invasion. Meanwhile, the country's leadership navigates an international landscape where developments in other regions can influence global stability. The crisis involving Iran represents one such development. President Zelensky's engagement with the issue highlights the reality that Ukraine's war exists within a broader global context. While Ukrainian forces continue defending their homeland against Russian aggression, the country also participates in conversations about international security. These discussions occur alongside the ongoing effort to protect Ukraine's sovereignty. The result is a moment where Ukraine's leadership must balance two realities at once: a war unfolding within its own borders, and a changing global environment that continues shaping international relations. Even amid these complexities, Ukraine's central focus remains unchanged. The country continues resisting Russia's invasion. Its soldiers continue defending their land. And its leadership continues representing Ukraine in conversations that extend far beyond the battlefield. While Ukraine continues defending itself against Russia's invasion, developments beyond the country's borders have drawn attention to the wider international landscape surrounding the conflict. One of those developments involves growing tensions related to Iran, a situation that has prompted responses from leaders across the world. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has addressed this evolving international crisis even as Ukraine remains deeply engaged in a war on its own territory. For Ukraine, the war with Russia remains the immediate and defining challenge. Russian forces entered Ukrainian land in February 2022, beginning a conflict that has reshaped the country's political, economic, and social life. From the earliest days of the invasion, Ukrainian forces organized resistance across the nation. Military units mobilized to defend cities. Infrastructure became part of defensive planning. Local authorities coordinated with national leadership to maintain stability while under attack. These efforts slowed Russia's initial advance and helped Ukraine maintain control over large parts of its territory. Yet while this struggle continues, Ukraine's leadership must also respond to developments taking place across the wider international stage. The tensions involving Iran have become one such development that commands attention from global leaders. President Zelensky's remarks about the situation illustrate how Ukraine participates in conversations about international security, even while defending itself at home. Ukraine's leadership communicates regularly with governments and institutions across the world. These diplomatic relationships were already important before the war, but the invasion placed Ukraine at the center of global discussions about sovereignty and territorial integrity. As a result, statements made by Ukrainian officials often reach audiences far beyond the country's borders. The situation involving Iran has become part of that broader diplomatic conversation. International observers note that conflicts and crises in different regions can influence each other through economic connections, political alliances, and shared security concerns. When tensions rise in one area, governments across the world often respond through diplomacy, communication, and coordination. Ukraine's leadership participates in these discussions while continuing to focus on the defense of its own territory. President Zelensky's attention to developments involving Iran reflects the responsibilities that come with leading a country during a period of global instability. Even while Ukrainian forces confront Russian troops on the battlefield, the government must remain aware of how international events might affect Ukraine's position in the world. The connection between these issues demonstrates how the war in Ukraine exists within a wider global environment. While the conflict began with Russia's invasion, the consequences of the war have reached far beyond Ukraine's borders. Energy markets have shifted, diplomatic alliances have strengthened or evolved, security policies have been reconsidered in multiple regions. Within this environment, discussions about Iran occur alongside conversations about Ukraine's war with Russia. For Ukrainian soldiers serving on the front lines, however, the immediate reality remains unchanged. They continue standing in defensive positions across regions where the war remains active. Artillery exchanges and reconnaissance activity shape the daily rhythm of operations along contested areas. Each unit stationed along the front line carries the same mission: protect the territory, support fellow soldiers, defend the nation. Despite the pressures of war, Ukrainian society continues functioning in ways that demonstrate resilience. Communities organize volunteer efforts to support the armed forces. Medical workers treat those injured during combat. Emergency services respond quickly when attacks damage infrastructure. These actions reflect the determination of a population living through a conflict that has become part of everyday life. While international discussions about Iran unfold in diplomatic circles, Ukrainians remain focused on the struggle taking place within their own country. The war continues affecting millions of lives. Families have been displaced. Cities have faced damage. Yet even under these conditions, Ukrainian citizens continue supporting the defense effort. A volunteer working with a local assistance group described the atmosphere in a few quiet words. "We continue helping each other," the volunteer said softly, "because this country belongs to all of us." Those words capture the sense of unity that has developed across Ukraine during the war. Even as the government engages with international developments such as the crisis involving Iran, the nation's primary focus remains on resisting Russia's invasion. President Zelensky's leadership reflects this balance between domestic and international responsibilities. On one hand, he addresses the realities of war within Ukraine. On the other, he participates in discussions that shape global security. These two roles intersect as Ukraine continues navigating one of the most difficult periods in its modern history. The attention given to Iran illustrates how global events can influence diplomatic conversations even while a major war remains underway. Ukraine's leadership cannot ignore developments elsewhere in the world. Instead, it must remain engaged in those conversations while continuing to defend the nation's sovereignty. The war between Ukraine and Russia remains one of the most significant conflicts in modern Europe. Its consequences extend far beyond the battlefield. At the same time, tensions involving Iran demonstrate that global security challenges rarely occur in isolation. They intersect with one another in ways that require careful attention from national leaders. For Ukraine, the task remains clear: defend the homeland, maintain independence, participate in international discussions that shape the future of global stability. One Ukrainian serviceman, reflecting on the country's determination during this period, spoke quietly while standing near a defensive position. "We know what we are protecting," he said, "and we will continue." Those words echo across a nation that continues standing firm against Russia's invasion while observing developments that may influence the wider international environment. As Ukraine continues resisting Russia's invasion, the country's leadership faces a difficult responsibility. The war that began in February 2022 remains active across Ukrainian territory, yet developments in other parts of the world are also demanding attention from national leaders. The growing tensions involving Iran have become one of those developments. While Ukrainian soldiers remain deployed along the front lines defending their homeland, President Volodymyr Zelensky continues addressing international issues that influence global security. His engagement with the crisis surrounding Iran reflects how Ukraine's leadership operates within a complex international environment. The reality of war inside Ukraine has not diminished. Russian forces remain present in multiple areas of the country. Ukrainian units continue monitoring movements across contested regions where military activity shapes daily conditions. Artillery exchanges echo across open terrain. Reconnaissance patrols observe enemy positions. Commanders coordinate operations designed to protect Ukrainian territory. These activities form the routine of a war that has entered a prolonged stage. At the same time, Ukraine's leadership must also respond to events taking place beyond the country's borders. The crisis connected to Iran has prompted reactions from governments and institutions across the world. For Ukraine, acknowledging these developments reflects the country's participation in global conversations about security and stability. President Zelensky's public remarks about Iran occur within this broader context. Ukraine has become a central participant in discussions about international law, sovereignty, and military aggression since Russia launched its invasion. As a result, statements made by Ukrainian leaders are closely observed by international audiences. When Zelensky addresses tensions involving Iran, he does so while leading a country that continues defending itself against Russian military operations. The combination of these responsibilities illustrates the dual nature of Ukraine's current position. On one side stands the immediate reality of war within Ukrainian territory. On the other stands the wider international environment where diplomatic conversations shape global policy. Ukraine's leadership must operate within both spaces simultaneously. The war at home remains the defining priority. Ukrainian soldiers stationed along defensive lines continue performing their duties under conditions shaped by constant risk. Every day they monitor positions, maintain equipment, and prepare for potential confrontations with Russian forces. The mission remains consistent: defend the homeland, protect communities, preserve the country's independence. Despite the pressures created by the conflict, Ukrainian society continues functioning in ways that demonstrate resilience. Communities organize assistance networks to support the armed forces. Medical teams provide care for soldiers and civilians injured during the war. Emergency services respond whenever attacks damage infrastructure. These efforts reflect a collective determination that extends across the nation. While diplomatic discussions about Iran occur on the international stage, the daily lives of many Ukrainians remain connected to the struggle taking place inside their own country. Air raid warnings remain part of life in many cities. Families continue adapting to displacement caused by the war. Local authorities work to maintain public services under challenging conditions. Yet even within these circumstances, the country continues looking outward toward the wider international community. Ukraine's leadership recognizes that global events can influence diplomatic relationships, economic stability, and international support networks. For this reason, developments involving Iran are not ignored. Instead, they become part of the broader conversations in which Ukraine participates while defending its sovereignty. Observers watching these developments note how Ukraine's role in international discussions has expanded since the beginning of the war. The invasion placed Ukraine at the center of global attention. Its struggle to defend independence has become a point of reference in debates about international law and security. When Zelensky addresses international issues such as the crisis involving Iran, those remarks occur within the framework of a country that remains under military pressure. The balance between domestic defense and international engagement illustrates the responsibilities of leadership during wartime. A president must guide the nation through the immediate challenges of conflict while also maintaining relationships with partners and institutions around the world. For Ukraine, these responsibilities are carried out simultaneously. The war continues shaping the nation's future. Diplomatic conversations continue shaping Ukraine's relationships with other countries. Together, these realities form the environment in which Ukraine's leadership now operates. One Ukrainian volunteer assisting soldiers near a logistics center described the emotional atmosphere in a brief reflection. "We help because this country is ours," the volunteer said quietly, "and it must endure." Those words echo the determination shared by millions of Ukrainians living through the war. Even as global crises draw attention from international leaders, Ukraine's struggle against Russia's invasion remains the central challenge facing the nation. Ukrainian soldiers continue guarding their homeland. Citizens continue supporting the defense effort, and the country's leadership continues navigating an international landscape where events beyond Ukraine's borders can influence global stability. In this moment, Ukraine stands at the intersection of two realities: a war unfolding inside its own territory, and a wider world where tensions involving Iran and other issues continue shaping diplomatic conversations. Through both challenges, the country remains focused on its fundamental objective: protect the nation, defend independence, ensure that Ukraine continues standing despite the pressures of war.